classrooms are meant to be a stepping stone, but ultimately they're synthetic. You could never fit the what's this word? The bigness of life, the fullness of life into a classroom. And when our learning is confined to those four walls, like that's one of the things that like makes me want to cry when I see it, because I'm like, no, there's so much more than this, and we are capable of so much more than this.
Thank you so much. This is such an important topic, I think, for that we just don't. Well, of course, I think it's an important topic. My name of my podcast is What We Should Have Learned in School. But again, this much more natural alignment with life and with learning, and somehow when we do that, whether it's with language, whether it's how we approach mental and physical health, or how we approach our dreams and our passions and building a business, or becoming a recording artist, or whatever it is, it's so interesting that there's just for what I've seen from myself and many other people, there's an immense amount of freedom that can open up. You don't get out of being human, but when we look at, again, like you said, what we naturally have going on, when we step back and we remove ourselves from all the fears, all the beliefs, all the cultural conditioning, to see what processes exist, what's really here, it can offer just an amazing enrichment.
Our guest today is Irina Pravet, and I came across her originally through her TED Talk. And she has a really interesting story. She was born in Romania, then lived in Canada, and now lives in Finland. So she knows all about the nitty-gritty of learning and adapting to new languages. If you're curious of how she does it, stay tuned. You are listening to What We Should Have Learned in School.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on wherever you find yourself in the world today. I am snuggled in relatively sunny Finland. We're enjoying a very nice spring here in Finland. And today we are going to talk about one of those things that a lot of us tend to think is an impossible task. We're going to talk about language today, but also think if you aren't trying to learn a new language, but there is something you want to learn, I think this could also relate. So keep that kind of in your mind as we talk today. My guest today is going to tell us a really different perspective than what we're used to on language, because we're going to talk about one of the most difficult languages in the world, which is learning Finnish. And I'm sure you hear just the gamut of excuses. I mean, I can think off the top of my head, Irina, I'm too old to learn a language. You can't learn language when you're an adult. That's it's only you can do that when you're a child. I'm not good at it. I have no time. I have no money. I mean, and so on and so forth. So I would just love to give you the stage today. So I'll let you take it away and what you see about this, Irina.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Thank you. Well, where do I start? I mean, yeah, those excuses that you're listing, they're like music to my ears. Like, yeah, keep on coming. I have as many excuses as people have. I think what I try to do in my work is really help people see a new perspective, because what we're seeing right now with the impossibility of learning language is really, in my opinion, a misunderstanding of how language is learned, of what language really can provide us with, not just like a translation of like, here's 5 different languages to say this one word in, and like, what's the point of that? But rather a whole new perspective. So I find myself often explaining the purpose of a paradigm, and when we're talking about paradigm shifts. And I find that when we can shift the paradigm from this, like, I have all these excuses and this is why it's impossible, to kind of understanding language learning in a whole different light, then it just makes so much sense. We go from climbing this like uphill battle to like, yay, like bike riding all the way down, and like, oh, that was so fun. Let me just climb back up and do it again. So yeah, that's the gist of it.
So, okay, when I hear paradigm shift, I'm hearing a totally different way to do something. And I think that, for me, as someone that is pretty new to learning, for instance, the language of Finnish, we'll just use Finnish as the beautiful example for today, since it's relevant because you and I both live in Finland and we are not native Finnish speakers.
Nope.
One thing that comes to mind is kind of kind of like what you're saying, like pushing a boulder up a hill, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, a lot of hard work. I think of like rote memorization, kind of like what you're saying, that you need to like sit down and you need to sweat and you need to work, and it's going to be hard by the nature of it. And it sounds like you're offering something other than that. So what is it about learning that we kind of get wrong?
Such a charged question. What is it about learning, or what is it about learning language that we get wrong? Well, I think that language has been put into the categories of things that you learn in school. I think this is the right podcast to be talking about this on. So we think, okay, well, I'm going to go to school and there's a teacher, and the teacher is going to tell me things, and the teacher is the expert on how I learn. And I need to do what the teacher does because the teacher knows best how I'm going to learn. Except I don't see, so let's first talk about the fact that I don't see language as like a history lesson, or like something where rote memorization would come in handy. Like, hey, have you learned the periodic table? You need to memorize it. Although lately I've heard like more interesting takes on these things as well. But regardless of that, when I talk about Finnish and when I talk about languages, I'm talking about a skill. And this idea of going into the classroom and learning the language, but not speaking it, not treating it like a skill, is like, hey, Amy, you want to learn how to swim? Come into my classroom. I will tell you all about the techniques. We're going to read these textbooks on swimming, and you're going to see how the best swimmers do it in a diagram, okay? And we're not going to go to the pool because we don't have time for that. And it's just like this, how can we fit it into this paradigm of classroom learning? And through that squeezing of the skill into a subject, I think we've lost like the soul of it. Like I don't even know. No, I don't even remember what the original question was, but maybe that's a little bit about the paradigm. So in a sense, when I'm I'm talking about like breaking it out of the classroom. And the classroom has advantages. You can use the classroom, but it is not the end all be all. And any language teacher will tell you, like, go out, speak, go forth into the world. And that's really, it's just that somehow the classroom has gained this like monopoly on like, this is the best way to learn. And the teacher knows best. But I actually have a friend who teaches kindergarten here in Finland. And she told me that the point of the schooling system and kindergarten, but like the entire education system, is to teach you how you learn best. And I like, can we say, I was gonna say, like, I lost my shit. I was like, what? Was that the point of the education system? Because I did not get that memo. If they had just like it up, they're like, hi, welcome to school. This is why you're here. You are perfectly competent, perfectly capable of learning absolutely anything, everything even that you want to. And we're here just to help empower you to do that. Like, holy shit, was that okay? Like 15 years later, at least this friend who, went to not teachers college, but like what they have here, like university to teach, she shared with me that very important piece of information. And the ultimate thing is that no language teacher knows how you are going to learn Finnish, for example, because the way that you learn is different from the way that I learn, and different from the way that somebody listening to this is learning. So we can share ideas, but ultimately we need to be looking at this in a way of like, I am in power. I don't just give away my power to, anyone who calls themselves an expert.
Oh my goodness. There's so many goodies in this. I don't know how we're going to get this into 15 minutes. Are we already on like 8? I don't know. But we're going to do our best. Listeners.
We're going to try.
I mean, yeah, that was not my personal experience, of course, and this is all subjective. Of course, not all schools are the same, but I mean, very much there was a right and a wrong way to do things. And it was a very competitive environment. You were put against, am I doing better than my peers with my A+ and Johnny got an A or whatever it is, And I can see how perhaps we might be taking that into language learning, this fear of of getting it wrong. You know, it sounds very simple, like, yeah, just speak. But I know when I first started learning, I mean, I was really, I did these really weird things. I would like, well, I'm doing it now, you see, maybe it's a defense mechanism, but I would giggle like after anytime I'd said like one phrase in Finnish, I would giggle, or I would turn red when I was with the family or things like that. So
I used to mumble, and then I used to speak so quietly while sort of mumbling in a really high-pitched, childlike voice. And my husband's like, no one can hear what you're saying. And I'm like, I can't, like, I could try to lower my voice, but like I couldn't. It was just this immediate reaction. And I think a lot of stuff, yeah, like giggling, like, let's not take this too seriously, or high-pitched voice, like, I'm a child, I'm vulnerable, like, please like me, right?
Yeah.
Like all of this stuff comes up. And I think that like, we never talk about that in a classroom, but it's a real thing where it's like, hey, this is vulnerable. Sometimes it's hard to suck at something in the beginning, or to be like, oh, I know that this is so weird. And there's no discussion around that.
Mm.
You were about to ask me something.
No, I think that's perfect, because I think that kind of, maybe that's one of the core, maybe, again, I'll let you share what you see, but maybe that's one of the core differences in how you're moving forward with language in this paradigm shift, is that you're also fundamentally moving from a place of like insecurity and lack of ability. You know, I think that it's like foundational. It's like we feel vulnerable because we don't really feel that we can do it. You know, there's like not that knowing of kind of what our birthrights are. So I would love to hear you talk more about, is language something that is only for a select amount of people to learn, or is this more a fundamental gift of human beings?
Well, I like to think of it like, okay, you know, this new baby comes into the world and is born. Do you start thinking like, is this one going to walk? Is this one going to learn how to talk? You know, and I'm not like, you know, talking about, you know, kids that come into the world with certain, you know, limitations, but really, like, you know, the kid starts walking or taking a couple steps, falls down, gets back up, does it again. Like, we have all learned, anybody listening to this has learned how to speak one language. And we tend to think that this is something that we lose. You know, we've found through research that neuroplasticity like doesn't stop in childhood. It keeps going throughout your whole life. So you can learn new things. It's just that now we have all of these fears and vulnerabilities, and we're more aware of them. Whereas as kids, we also had this you know, this hyper learning phase in our brains where we really had to learn everything that was going on around us. And then sometimes for some people, language was like, oh, this is my thing. And for others, it was like, yeah, I don't do that thing. And yet we sort of have this blind spot when it comes to like, oh, but that language I'm using to speak to people all the time, it doesn't matter if it's French or Chinese or Swahili or Kosa.
It's really interesting also, this phenomenon that we have as we grow older, to really identify with things that don't help us. Like identifying as, I'm not that kind of person. You know, we dive into our memory banks and we think, oh, I struggled when I tried to learn that Spanish, you know, phrase, ¿cómo estás? You know, I couldn't even do that. So I could never even imagine becoming fluent in Spanish, for instance. And we take on all these, it seems to me, it's almost like an artificial blockage. And I'm curious if the people that you work with, you see that come up, that actually maybe it isn't what we think is blocking us, you know, as far as our skills, but what's really blocking us is our way of looking at it and looking at ourselves and looking at our ability as a human being.
I think there's a couple different points to what you just said. So one of them is basically, you know, we were in a vulnerable state and we tried something, and it led us to believe that we couldn't, because that was the thing that protected us from trying again and maybe getting hurt again, right? So that would be one example. Another one could be, well, it's quite frankly the environment. Like if there is a shitty narrative around, for example, the Finnish language being really hard to learn, I can't tell you the number of times people have told me like, oh, you don't need it, don't bother learning it.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And so I mean, I will try to keep this rant really minimal, but when it's like, when it's people who speak the language telling me that, it's like, first of all, they don't know what they're talking about. Second of all, when it's people who don't speak the language and they're like, I don't need it. I'm like, great, you have this numbing mechanism. I don't have that one. So I'm going to need to figure out some sort of way to align here to get like a deeper connection with people, because just not speaking the language for me did not feel like a choice. So those are some of the things that happened. Yeah, there's also the bigger conversation around, like, when I hear this stuff like, oh, we're making all this like artificial intelligence, and we're going to have AI and everything's going to translate, and I'm going to be able to speak to a Korean person, and we're going to be talking just like you and me right now, Amy, with like absolutely no problems. I'm like, yeah, that's not how language works. Because if you think about what it is that we are really doing, I have a thought based on some sort of experience, which I am encoding into sounds, which I'm putting into words and delivering to you, and you are receiving through your own filters. Like, language is amazing. So this idea that like, yeah, that's not my thing, to encode and communicate and connect with other people, I think we need to rethink the whole kind of attitude and just paradigm that we have around language in general. Is it just like, oh, well, pen, I can say that in 2 languages, whoop-de-doo? Or is it really about this collection of sounds that leads to an entire different worldview of seeing things?
Even though we don't usually think of it this way, language does offer us a new and different way of seeing ourselves, and it offers a new way of experiencing our world. And what can be more enriching than that? And I just love the work that Irina is doing, how she's innovating the field of language learning. If you yourself are interested in learning the Finnish language, of how to set yourself up for success, how to move from the classroom to the real world, Irina is hosting for a limited amount of time registration for her Finnish Through New Eyes program. And you can learn more about that by going to irinapravet.com. That's www.irinapravet. And it will also be in the show notes. And we are not done with Miss Irina yet. There is a part 2 of this. So stay tuned as we do a deeper dive into the fear mechanisms that prevent us from really exploring life in a fuller, richer way.